And I'm starting the webinar. So we'll wait for all of these items to sync. The webinar is live. Our YouTube feed is live. Dr. G, the meeting is yours.
Okay, I would like to call to order the August 17th ECI committee meeting. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Motion approved. Do we have anyone for public comment?
There is one person in the room and the hand is raised.
Okay, let me read the public comment statement.
Okay.
Tonight's meeting is our regularly scheduled committee meeting. In order to meet the requirements of Pennsylvania Sunshine Law, it is necessary to record the names of all citizens who speak to the committee during the meeting. To assure compliance with this requirement, it is essential that those planning to address the committee state their name and municipality. Members of the audience are asked to limit their questions and comments to no more than 3 minutes. This limit will permit time for all those who wish to speak to the committee. Whenever members of the audience exceed this time limit, the committee chair may ask the individual to yield to the next speaker. And with that, we can have our first speaker.
Dr. G, the audience of citizens is at the end of the meeting.
That's right.
Yeah. But you read the statement now, so you're good.
So I'm good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Bauer, for catching up. I went to the agenda quick to double check. I'm like, oh, I missed that.
I know. I was looking at the agenda and did not see it, and I apologize for that.
Yeah, and then the hands raised. So we obviously will have a public comment at the end. So we'll go to that as soon as we're ready at the end after our presentations.
You let me off for 1 month and I forget the routine. But thank you. So that means we're going to move to the agenda. So first item on our agenda is student travel. Who is presenting the student travel? Dr. Bauer?
I certainly can. No problem. So the first item here, being student travel, is a trip for our North Penn High School cheerleaders and 2 advisors and 5 adult chaperones to attend the cheerleading skills camp in Beach Lake, Pennsylvania, August 19th. That is on Friday. So if approved tonight, it would go before the board for action tomorrow. The cost for the district is simply the transportation. All other costs are subsidized by the students, their families, and their booster club. So asking for a motion to move this trip to action on tomorrow night's action agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Oh, any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, motion passes. Good luck to our cheerleaders. I hope they have a great time at the camp. And I was a cheerleader, so I hope they have a great time and they learn some new skills. So our next thing on our agenda is assessment. Dr. Hart and Mr. Nicholson.
Yep, so before they start, good evening, Board ECI Committee. I can't believe we're in August and we're getting ready to go back to school already, but I hope everyone had a really wonderful, relaxing summer. I was also a cheerleader, Dr. G. At any rate, I just wanted to kind of, before Dr. Hart and Mr. Nicholson present, just kind of share that the last time we were together, we actually talked about homework and some changes to the admin reg. And so anytime you talk about curriculum and instruction, you naturally leads to assessment. So tonight, We're going to have the presentation by Dr. Hart, our Director of Curriculum and Equity, and our Administrator of Secondary Education and Renovation, Mr. Nicholson, and they are going to particularly focus on the high school assessment, where we've been and where we're headed. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Hart. I think you're going to open us up.
Thank you very much. Bob, do you have the slides? Oh, there we are. Great. So it is really a pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon. And as Dr. Waters said, we're going to spend some time talking about assessment. And I'm delighted to have an opportunity to do that with Pete Nicholson today. First time in ECI in this particular role. As you all know, assessment is an integral part of the teaching and learning process. It is the opportunity for us to get a very good sense of what children already know, as well as the degree to which they have understood, mastered, and even really synthesized and been able to make sense of content or skills that are being taught during the school day. We spend a lot of time, both formally and informally, engaged in conversation about assessment. And so I want, even though we're going to have this broad, narrow focus on the high school and some aspects of assessment at the high school, I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to say that assessment is something that we're always engaged in, conversations from K all the way up through 12th grade. Two of the areas that we've been focusing on primarily in the area of math, because we have new resources in the elementary school. We are now having some new math resources in the middle school as well. And the idea and the focus of what does assessment look like, the degrees in which students really are able to demonstrate their understanding in a multitude of ways was an integral part of that process as well. And so kind of with that broad stroke, I want to kind of provide a little bit of a frame of the way in which we're going to organize our presentation this evening. We really think of this in two buckets. The first is all of the structure and the framework around assessment. When are assessments given? How often are they given? The continuity and consistency among teachers teaching a particular course or grade level. While those are aspects that are really important when we talk about assessment, it's not necessarily related to what the actual assessment is, but we do think that those are really important topics of conversation as we think about equity and making sure that the ways in which we structure our assessment schedules really do meet the wide range of needs of our students. And so Pete Nicholson's going to focus on those areas. And when he's finished, I'm going to kind of take over and talk a little bit more about assessment, but particularly authentic assessment. It's definitely been an area of conversation for quite some time. Authentic assessment, project-based learning are integral part in many aspects of our instructional program, but we definitely recognize that it's not as consistent as we want for it to be. And so we want to use this opportunity to talk a little bit about, as Dr. Waters said, kind of where we've been, highlight some areas where authentic assessment's really taking place, and then share the timeline of the work that we want to be engaged in. One of the things I also want to say before we jump into the formal presentation is that we do want to, it's an interesting time to have this presentation because teachers will just be coming back. And we think about looking at continuity and consistency across content areas and courses. Teachers play, and our department's chairs play a really important role in those conversations. We have a lot of expertise among our staff members. We want to be able to leverage that. There's some really amazing things that are already happening. We want to be able to build on that as well. And we recognize that we cannot do that in a vacuum. So you'll see the timeline, and I want to kind of provide the why. We've kind of organized the timeline in the way that we have. So having provided that frame, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Nicholson to talk a little bit about our goals and some of the structural pieces around assessment.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Hart. Thank you, Dr. Waters, and thanks to the committee for having us present this evening. I'm not going to go back through what Dr. Hart just put so well for all of us, but want to jump in here a little bit and talk about the goals for this year, some expectations that we're going to start with for the year, and then some things that we're going to explore throughout the year. And really, as Dr. Hart said, as teachers come back, starting tomorrow with our district-wide database, with our data retreat, and really looking at assessment and looking at consistency. So some of the goals, as she so nicely put, is consistency related to assessment across the different course-alike groups, and just consistency overall with the assessments that we're giving, specifically tonight at the high school, but overarching throughout the district. We talked about aligning assessment and the goal of reflecting the goals and parameters of the homework administrative reg. So we just heard about the admin reg earlier this evening. It was talked about, and you went over it in July. So realistically, the piece of that really frames this is the idea that at the secondary level, no more than 10% of a student's grade should be comprised of homework. So that kind of frames the discussion of overall grading, assessment, and what should comprise a student's grade in a particular course. And then finally, the goal, as Dr. Hart will speak a little bit more about, is enhancing and increasing students' authentic assessment experience. So not just taking paper and pencil tests, not just taking true, false, multiple choice essay formats of assessments, but really making sure that we are measuring what students know and what they can do in authentic ways. Project-based learning and some non-formal assessment ways that will lead to students showing success in their learning in other forms and formats. Mr. Gilmer? So I said that part of this are kind of the expectations and the ideas that we're starting the school year with. Again, starting with data retreat tomorrow at the secondary level. The first one is ensuring that grading criteria are made very, very clear from day one with students and with families. There should be no surprises in what comprises a student's grade. It shouldn't be at the end of the school year where we find out that something was worth X percent of a grade, or that this assessment or that project really drug a student's grade down, or really helped the student to buffer their grade when they really didn't know or couldn't do what was asked of them. So making sure that there are no surprises and we're very upfront with what will comprise the grade and what we expect students to know and do as the school year progresses. Another expectation is looking at our holidays, looking at the district calendar, and really coming up with days and dates that we should not be assessing students. So we shouldn't be assessing students, obviously, on some of the holidays where we don't have school, but we also shouldn't be necessarily assessing students the day after a longer term break. So we had that and we communicated that last year, if many of you remember, around some of the breaks, the spring break, the winter break, and some other religious holidays. But we're working now a little bit more concerted way with technology to make sure that teachers aren't even allowed to put it in their grade book for certain dates, those assessments around some of these holidays. So working through that. And then finally, establishing a time frame between the presentation of new content and assessment. So when I talk about this, we don't want a teacher delivering new content today on Wednesday and then assessing that content tomorrow without any kind of practice, any kind of feedback on what the student can do or what they know about that new content, and really making sure that we are giving ample time for students to practice, for students to take in what they learned and be able to provide some feedback to the teacher, whether they know that information or not, prior to being assessed on that new information. Mr. Gilmer? And then other things we want to explore throughout the year. And this really, I spoke a little bit earlier, and Dr. Hart did as well, about consistency. This slide is all about that. We really want to enhance and increase consistency across the board with assessment. First of all, consistency with a teacher across the marking period or across the grade book and the pieces that fall into the final grade. We shouldn't have 3 assessments in the first marking period, 1 assessment in the second marking period, 8 assessments in the third marking period, and so on and so forth. We really want to have some consistency in what comprises a grade book and what students are graded on throughout the year. Obviously, there are some different pieces and portions and some things that we will uncover and work with our department chairs and with our data teams to work through there, but really making sure that there is some consistency, not just across teachers, but even with the teacher across the marking periods. Looking at course-alike standardized grade books. So we want to make sure that there is consistency in what comprises a student's grade in, let's say, biology honors no matter who that teacher is at the high school, whether it be teacher A or teacher B, there should be consistency in what's being asked of the student and really what is being seen in Infinite Campus that plays into the student's grade. It shouldn't fall upon which teacher you get to really determine what you're being assessed on or what you're being asked to know and do as a student. So making sure, not necessarily that between different courses, because there's so many little idiosyncrasies, between a math course, a science course, an art course, but ensuring that if students have the same course, they're getting the same experience. Variation in the types of assessments, and Dr. Hart's going to talk about authentic assessments and some second chance learning in just a few minutes, so I won't dive deep into that, but it goes back to what I had said earlier. We're not just taking multiple choice assessments, we're not just taking essay assessments, we're doing things that are a little bit more authentic and making sure we're varying the types and ways that students can show their proficiency in the coursework. Consistency of weight of assignments across teachers, again, making sure that if we have a large assignment or a large project from one teacher, it's similar with the other teacher, and that the experience between the two is similar between students. Consistent practice and strategies for supporting students, really how we're going to make sure, and this will play in on the next slide with some second chance learning, how we're supporting students that might be struggling, or even how we're supporting students that need to maybe be pushed a little bit more because they can do better and they can have some additional additional work that they're able to do that can progress their learning even further. And then finally, consistent review of student performance to look at trends, really looking at the data, sitting down when we have consistency, when we have all of these things in place, sitting down on a constant basis with our data teams, with our course select teachers, with our content teachers to make sure that we are looking and monitoring and addressing some trends we're maybe seeing where students may be having a challenge with this concept here and how teachers across that content are going to address some of those issues, or students are really knocking out of the park in this teacher's course with this content. What can the other teachers of that course glean from the teacher to make sure that students are getting that experience and really growing and learning in the same way that their peers are. And with that, I believe I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Hart.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So one of the things that Mr. Nicholson talked a little bit about was this notion of second chance learning. And this ties into some of the structural pieces regarding the time between when content is presented and assessed, and then how often we kind of move on to new assessment, new content as well. In my role, we spend a lot of time being very focused on the realization that children learn in different ways. They also learn some a little bit quicker, some need a little bit more time. And it's really important for us as we're thinking about assessment calendars and assessment opportunities that if children have a second chance to be able to really master or learn information. Just because we teach information and we test, if we find that children don't really understand it, it really is it's really our responsibility to kind of take a pause, see what has not been, learned, how can we do things a little bit differently to ensure that the students really do master, understand, and are able to really transfer some of the skills and knowledge that we're teaching into other situations. And so you can see on this slide, one of our goals is to make sure that second chance learning is integrated into our practices so that it is an integral part of what kids know that they have opportunities to try it again. I think sometimes there are conversations where we give kids a second chance, they won't really pay attention the first time. The research doesn't really, show that as well, right? If I need a little extra time, we want to be able to provide that as well. And so we want to make sure that that's an integral part of kind of what we're doing. We have had an opportunity as a curriculum team to be able to review guidelines of some of our neighboring districts. And the guidelines are things that we feel like are really nice fit for some of the philosophical perspective and the conversations that we're having around assessment and homework. And we want to kind of use that as a foundation for the work that we're going to be engaged in. Next slide. So as we talk about this notion of authentic assessment, as Mr. Nicholson said, we can have kids write essays, we can do multiple choice, we can have fill in the blanks, we can do true and false, but at the end of the day, we teach skills and concepts so they're able to transfer those experiences into real life opportunities. No one gets together on a Friday night and goes, hey, 5 times 5, right? We use it to solve things in our lives. And so we recognize that, as I said earlier, we definitely have wonderful examples of authentic assessment being implemented in a number of our classrooms across the high school, but we recognize that we want for that to be more consistent. So I want to take a little bit of time to kind of walk through this timeline with you to kind of let you know where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. So in May, the May professional development session spent time, the high school team spent a lot of time really identifying exemplars and really celebrating staff successes. I think Sarah Radican played an important role, I think, in that conversation along with Pete Nicholson, just really having people recognize the work that's already taking place and learning from one another and really setting a foundation for where we want to be going. This summer, I think for the first time, we've had Work Together Wednesdays where our entire admin team got together to focus on a variety of topics in preparation for the upcoming school year. And on a couple of those Work Together Wednesdays, the admin team really did focus on goals and what are our goals from an instructional perspective as we look at our data, think about what we want for kids to be able to do in those as we kind of move into the following year, and how do we leverage some of our current best practices to make sure that we're able to reach those goals. And so that was been really rich, I think really powerful conversations. I think this idea very often of kind of saying, how can we build on what is already here? We've already begun this month in August, and we'll continue some of the work in September, really setting the stage to really have kind of authentic assessment kind of take off. Our curriculum team has been reviewing templates for best practices. We've done a fair amount of research. Hanover's done a really nice template that really kind of talks about this is kind of, if we're kind of shifting to authentic assessment, here are some exemplars, here are ways to kind of take things that we may be doing and really being able to enhance them so they're more reflective of the tenets of project-based learning or authentic assessment. We've begun to share some of that information with department chairs and teams, and we'll really take a much deeper dive as we're moving into the fall. We've allocated time in our August professional development days to really begin that conversation so that teachers are starting the year with this lens as they think about assessment moving forward. We have allocated time in November. There are 2 days, 2 of our professional development days in November, where we have our secondary folks having PD while our elementary teachers are engaged in conferences. And this will be time where teams will collaborate and develop assessments, refine some of the logistical considerations that Pete Nicholson talked about a little while ago as well. Our ultimate goal is really to implement authentic assessment in each of the courses by the end of the year. And we recognize, and I think I talked a little bit about this in the very beginning, that while we put some things in place, right, we make the best decisions with the information we have. We recognize that it's really important that we have professional development, feedback, practice as we're moving through the spring as well. We want to make sure that when teachers have taken a risk to try something a little bit different, if it hasn't gone exactly as they anticipated, how can we give feedback? How can we provide opportunities and PLCs to be able to reflect on what has worked? What are some things that we want to refine and get better at so that we know that those experiences for students are as rich as possible. While we recognize that there is work to be done, there are some really amazing things that are already taking place, and I won't be able to highlight everything, but I did want to kind of just showcase a couple of things, particularly, I know we're talking about math, but I did highlight, I think in the very beginning, with the new math resource in our middle schools, there's a tremendous amount of focus on student and teacher collaboration, the opportunity to reassess skills, give kids opportunities if they haven't been able to master something the first time to kind of give it a whirl again, and a lot of student choice as well. Embedded within that resource are lots of opportunities for a student to really be able to engage in project-based activities that really do give kids an opportunity to take those skills and strategies that are being taught and really be able to apply them in realistic and authentic situations. Social studies department, lots of opportunities between mock trials, the idea of the change project that happens in world history, and kids have an opportunity to create infographic in American history. Sorry about that. As well. Within science, there's always opportunities around labs, and some of our other classes around business and technology. That idea of authentic assessment's an integral part of those courses already. And so we want to kind of be able to highlight that, celebrate it, and then also kind of make sure that we can take some of the tenets and share it across some of the other content areas as well. So some next steps. I said this in the very beginning, so I'll kind of wrap up with it as well. We recognize there's a tremendous amount of expertise among and between our staff members. And so we do want to, we've started to, but want to really make sure we have nice, big, robust committees with department chairs and teachers to really explore lots of the topics that we've talked about tonight related to assessment. And the 4 big areas, and you can see those there, are really some logistical considerations to make sure that we're really much more consistent in the structures that we use around assessment. We want to be able to kind of take a deeper dive so people really understand what we mean by authentic assessment, what project-based learning really is, second chance learning, how do we really incorporate that in and really be able to have a very good sense of that. We recognize it does not happen by chance, that we have to be really intentional in allocating time for the discourse, allocating time for research, allocating time for teachers to really develop assessments that really do fall within the tenets of what we're hoping for. And so you can see here on the slide that we have a number of professional development sessions that are set up beginning in November and then throughout the year to be able to get the ball rolling. And then in the fall in preparation for January, but to also have times in both February and May where people have an opportunity to kind of come back and say, where are we? How has it gone? What has worked? What has not? We wanted for our students to be able to do this and demonstrate this. Have we done it to the degree that we wanted them to? There might be some unintended ahas that we'll be able to share as well. So it's really important, I think, from our lens, that there's a lot of robust conversation and that we can be really supportive as people are making this transition. And I think that is the end of our presentation, and we'll be very happy to entertain any comments or questions that anyone has.
I'll start us off. Relative to the timeline, in your last slide when you talked about next steps, I know you talked about meeting, the time throughout the year to really be able to focus on the authentic assessments and the conversations that need to happen around that, project-based learning. What are the things from, I don't know, maybe it's slide 2 or 3, that you see as immediate that can just be kind of guidance for teachers to start off the year with? If I'm a parent or a student, what can I see that's different from last year to this year that are more immediate, that does not necessarily take a year-long conversation? What are the things on that slide that you see as more immediate, that are more, the department chairs are going to kind of just start articulate, this is the guidance as it relates to assessment, and that aligns also with our homework policy? Which of those things? And maybe you could pull up the slide so we can look at that. So just as you're referring. Bob, can you put back up the slide?
Mm-hmm.
So, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to jump in. You know that a little bit best. I think sure. We try to. I'll start the conversation, then I'll pass the torch. I think go back a little bit more. I think it says the beginning of the year. Go back. Okay. There you go. So I think the way that the items that are on this slide are that we're starting the year with this, right? Like automatically beginning the year. We don't necessarily need to have lots of conversations about these, right? They're best practices. I think that it's really about being more intentional, not that these things aren't happening, but the idea that we're really clear and very intentional. Would you agree with that, Pete? I don't want to speak out of turn.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that this is a clear area that we need to grow in, and we need to grow in to begin the school year, is making sure that, as I said, that students' families really know how their students are being graded, what the expectations are, that there will be no assessments, right after new presentation of new material. And I think also, if you go back to the second slide, the consistent, I guess, communication of the homework admin reg, and the fact that homework is not going to be worth more than 10%. And as part of the homework reg, the amount of time that students should expect to be working on homework. I know that was a big piece of that homework admin reg meeting committee. I think we met about 10 times. There was a large group, which you all know, but just to reiterate, I think these are the big takeaways that you should see this year, that parents will see this year, is that we're hoping that you see less homework in many cases for students, to help balance that work or school life balance, and the many facets of mental health and stress that our students are dealing with. I also think you'll see more consistency related to teachers being explicit about when assessments are, what types of assessments will happen, and exactly how students will be graded in their courses.
So can I expect that in Infinite Campus, there will be loaded, teachers will have the ability to load the assignments so that as a parent, I can see, okay, my child is taking, English 101, and here are the assignments that make up their grade. Or is there a syllabus, or how will I know as a parent specifically what makes up their grade? Not just 10% is homework, 50% is test. Because that's not the same. Telling me 50% is test is not the same as saying to me, here are the things that are going to be graded this marking period. Where do I find those if I'm a parent? And as a teacher, where do I put that? Right? I'm speaking for both. If I'm a teacher, where am I loading that? And if I'm a parent, where do I look for that?
Sure, and I think I believe it's more the latter than the former. I think we have room to grow there, and maybe we're there eventually, where you'll be able to open on day one and see all of the grades that will make up the first marking period. I think right now we're looking more to look to the grading policies that have been traditional, and trying to make them more robust at the high school level. To include more of these pieces in there. Like I said, I'd love when this work is done, and as this work is being completed, where we're working through this consistency, where we have some, again, I think I use biology honors. If we look at bio honors, where we know that these are the pieces, these are the takeaways that students are going to be graded on in the first marking period for all of bio honors, that eventually, can we get to that place? I think absolutely. For now, for day one this year, I think, with teachers just coming back this coming week, and the work we have to get done, I don't believe that's logical for this year, but I do believe we can help, and we can work on ensuring that the grading policies are a little bit more robust and include more of that information for folks.
I have a couple other questions, but I'm going to let Mr.
Yeah, well, actually, it's kind of a follow-up on that. One of the things that I don't see on the list that I think could be added is the second chance learning. I don't know that that's necessarily something that has to wait. I understand that there are those who are reluctant to do it. As you said, some articulating the idea that, if they don't pay attention the first time, they get a second chance. There may be a lot of reasons why they don't pay attention the first time, if that is the case. It could be family troubles at home. It could be work. It could be illness. It could be they just didn't pay attention the first time. If the objective of these classes is for students to learn the content, then if they do very poorly on an assessment, a second opportunity simply gives them a better opportunity, a second chance to review that content, hone in on the areas where they did poorly, and relearn the content. To me, it's a very logical step. So I would hope that that's something else that we could consider doing early on, because I think that's more of a cultural shift more than anything. Not necessarily something that would require, a lot of planning or professional development. And I say that, and I want to be very clear about this, that I do think we need to strike a balance here, right? We talked a lot about consistency, and I do want to make sure that it's understood that those of us that are on this committee, those of us on the board, respect the agency of teachers and their expertise, right? We don't necessarily say that every assessment needs to be the same, that all of the projects that are being done necessarily have to be the same, just that there is consistency among what is being evaluated, right, in relation to that grade, because it is problematic when you have the same course and students are talking about, oh, you got that teacher versus, oh, you got that teacher, right? Like that's not a sign of, I think, a best practice environment, right? So we want to make sure that when we're doing this, we are respecting the ability of teachers to still, have control over, what is happening in the room, but still not be so divergent from their colleagues that you have teachers that you have situations where people are less inclined or more inclined to take one section over another. What else did I say here? Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about here in terms of this plan, I've heard the term consistency a lot. It's consistency, it's relevance, right? Like if I, as a professional or any professional, were exclusively evaluated in our ability to memorize content and then show our ability the next day to produce that content that we memorized without using resources, without any other mode of delivery in terms of our ability to demonstrate proficiency, we'd probably be considered derelict, right? I mean, certainly we expect professionals to use tools around them to do their job better. Why we don't ever expect that of students in any realm is, a practice from the beginning of time when public education was new. And it's another one of these things that I just think that we do because it's always been done that way. And I think that we are now with this initiative starting to move toward a newer, more relevant model of learning, and then, like I said, the third component there, consistency, relevance, and simply persistence toward proficiency, right? If you didn't get it the first time, what is the harm in giving somebody a second opportunity to look at it and take another chance? And that's my personal feeling on it, but I do believe that these are important strategies that are going to make education not just more relevant, but it will stick with them longer, right? There's too many times students will memorize, cram information, take the assessment, and then a week later, if you ask them, give them the same assessment, they'd probably not do nearly as well. They might get 10 points worse because it was in their short-term memory and it's been used and now they've moved on from it. To be able to connect it to something authentic, actual action-based, implementing the learning into a project, that's where the real learning takes place. That's where real learning takes place in anywhere. So I think that this is a step, certainly in a direction that's going to make North Penn a stronger school district and institution for learning.
That's great feedback. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
I guess I would, and I completely agree about the second chance learning. I'd like to see that earlier in the year. I don't think that we need to talk about things for an entire year in order to. I think there are things that we do need to talk about, like authentic assessment. That takes a lot of planning, project-based learning. I also want to push just a little bit on the concept of being able to articulate to students what specifically is going to make up your grade. Because if we're preparing students to go into college, I have a college student now. She gets a syllabus. She can see clearly what her grade is going to be made up of. These are going to be the assignments, and here's when they're going to be due. I understand that we're trying to get to a place of consistency. And what is that saying about not letting good be the enemy of great or something? Maybe it's flipped, great. But the point being that maybe this year is a phase-in year where we're just saying to teachers, listen, we want you to at least have an infinite campus, what you're going to be grading from the beginning of the marking period, so that families know, and so that families, students who need a little more support from their families can provide that as well. Maybe it's not as consistent as we would like it to be this year, right? So maybe that part isn't there, but maybe at least the practice of starting to put some of that in. Maybe it's not an infinite campus, maybe it's communicated in some way, so that students know this is how many assignments I even have in order to, that's going to make up my grade. I think that's something we should be teaching our students, because that's what it looks like when you go to college, or even go out into the work world. You know what kind of your projects are that you have to do, that your boss is expecting you to complete. So I would like to kind of push a little bit on the idea that, along with second chance learning, that that's something that could be more guidance at the beginning of the year, and that that could be something that we more phase in to the year, as opposed to saying, well, we don't have that list that's perfect for biology now, and therefore we're not going to do it until next year. Just a thought there. I think Dr. Bauer and then Mr. Fusco.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Dr. G, you kind of, as I raised my hand at the start of your comments, but you really got to the place where I was thinking that I think when you initially, and Mr. Fusco, you mentioned kind of the agency for teachers, when you say, I want to know the detail of what's going to be graded, that to me, as a high school teacher, potentially teaching 180 days sounds daunting, right? Like, I don't know what I'm grading, when and how. But you do have a sense by marking period. Hey, look, there's going to be 3 assessments this marking period. One will roughly be at the beginning of October, then you'll see one in November, and then one just before winter break, and you can expect 2 projects. Those types of details, I think, is a great transition to more detail, because I teach a graduate course. I'm sure you've taught graduate courses as well. I can tell you exactly what's due every night of class. I'm not sure they're there with the 180 days, but I think they can give you the big overarching thing so families and students aren't surprised. So I really think us pushing, hey, we want you to provide as much detail as you responsibly can right at the start of each marking period. I think that's completely reasonable. So I like that kind of as a push towards that direction. So I appreciate it.
And can I just say, I also think that there has to be some flexibility also in that understanding, right? Like, because this is new, right? And what you're suggesting, Dr. Bauer, I think is totally in line with, what is reasonable. At the same time, things do come up, right? If for some reason you say there's going to be 3 assessments and there happens to be 2, we just went through 2 years of unexpected, chaos. So, there is an understanding that it isn't a hard and fast contract commitment yet, right? It's that over time, once there is more consistency among this, and we've had time in professional development, that teachers are going to be more comfortable, with this idea of saying, okay, here's the way the each marking period will lay out, and here's what you can anticipate. But I do want to be able to give flexibility to teachers too, because this is new, and I do see this being something very daunting for them, and I don't want them to watch this video and think that we're, coming down, We want to work with them with this, right? We want to partner with them in this to make sure that this is going to be responsive to the needs of students first and foremost, but also understanding that is a lot of work on their part that this is going to entail, and that we want to be supportive of that and of them in this process.
Mr. McBain?
Oh, what does a regular education teacher say during this conversation, right? So certainly to the point of when parents should, have a very clear idea of what their students are going to be assessed on and how that's going to work. It comes down to the LMS so often as well, right? So where I teach in Upper Dublin, we're on Schoology, and I can put an assignment up and I can post pretty much anything I want. to explain what that assignment is going to be and have the rubric up there as well. I'm pretty sure that as North Penn works with Infinite Campus and Canvas together, that's also there. I'm getting a thumbs up from Dr. Bauer. So certainly, even if it's not at the very beginning of the marking period, a teacher can, as time goes on, get a lot more detailed. If they haven't said, okay, this exact date 2 months from now is going to be this type of assessment. But I think that we're well equipped to help teachers that way. I want to thank Dr. Hart for talking about giving educators a lot of time and like building that in intentionally to look at how we can make the adjustment from some maybe more traditional teachers, of which my gray hair illustrates I might be becoming now, how we can get more traditional teachers who've been doing it a while, transition to authentic learning. And for the parents who might be looking this up later, trying to figure out what authentic learning is, as a history teacher, and history was brought up, I can have students write an essay on the factors at play at the end of World War I that led to this type of treaty that led to World War II, or I can sit the students down and have them negotiate as the nations involved in that treaty as well. And the point I'll try to make there is, when you have students take part in these activities that are not paper and pencil and not Scantron multiple choice to get back in the day, that gives them a lot more agency over their learning as well. So they see a role that's different and they want to try that out in that age group particularly. And so that's a positive thing. And I really appreciate Dr. Hart and Mr. Nicholson, including some professional development time there. On the issue of second chance learning, I think we can all agree that there's absolutely a place for it for sure. I think if you ask any educator, particularly here in North Penn, where we have some great ones, if they're going to allow a student to, try to make up some work, try to have another go at it as a result of personal family issues, things like that, we've got students who leave school and go straight to work for 4 or 5, 6 hours every day. We have to be cognizant of that. And I think teachers are. My only concern is the logistics of it, right? When a second assessment has to come around, by nature, it may have to be different than the first one a little bit, such that the exact same processes are not being asked of the student again. Sometimes we need a place to physically put a student who's making something up while the rest of the class is going on. Do we have people that are available to oversee a test or whatever type of assessment that is? If it's a project that was a presentation, do we have enough time and enough audience members to give the right kind of feedback to that presentation? So certainly I'd like to explore those things further. And I know that that'll be part of the conversation. I see Dr. Hart's hand up already, so go ahead.
Dr. Hart.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you said everything that I was thinking. So thank you for that. I think part of our goal, and Pete definitely, chime in as well, is we know that it needs to be done well. We know that we want to be thoughtful and intentional about, what does that look like? What are the structures? And that there's continuity and consistency, among and between teachers as well. And so I never want to give the impression that we're just going to we'll take forever to get it done. That's not it. But I do think, in my experience, the collaboration, the idea of kind of working through what can this look like? It might look different in math and it doesn't, in an English class or a history class, what does that look like? That is the piece, the logistical piece is the piece, I think, that's really the work, right? We all agree that we've not done our jobs if kids walk out and they've not learned what we wanted them to learn, right? We don't want that, but we do want to make sure that we've created a structure that really does work, and that we've been intentional and really deliberate. And sometimes that takes just a little bit of time. And so, Dr. G, I always really appreciate the push and making sure that we're doing our very best to kind of keep it moving. But I do appreciate just the opportunity to be able to say yes, and we just want to make sure that we do it incredibly well. I think the idea that we have some inconsistencies, we're trying really hard to dismantle that. And as we try new initiatives and ways in which to engage in our work, we kind of want to bring everyone along together with understanding the why and the structure so that our students have the experiences that we really want for them to have.
And I appreciate that, Dr. Hart. One of the things that I would say is, you always have those early adopters, right? I know now that there are teachers at North Penn who are already doing second chance learning, right? That's just part of what they've been doing. And so I also think in terms of what Mr. Fusco described as that culture shift is let's support those early adopters as well, which is why I think like it's okay to roll it out and say this is something that we are wanting to move towards and have discussions at department meetings all year, right? And that moves the needle a little bit closer to whatever, let's say May or March, when you actually want to say, okay, now we've had discussions, now we've had those early adopters, now it's March, everyone really should be, or May, everyone really should be at the point of this is a consistent practice across the building. Does that make, I guess, does that make sense in terms of like, that's, I think, the push, like, let's at least start the culture shift, which I think Mr. Fusco described really well. And again, I think there's teachers already doing it because that's what I've experienced. Mr. Nicholson.
Yeah, no, Dr. G, I appreciate what you just said. And I was actually going to jump in and speak a little bit to that. If I recall, when we initiated Chromebooks and we were looking to go more digital, we did leverage our early adopters. And while Dr. Bauer was principal, we leveraged them to run workshops for teachers that were a little bit slower to transition and were, maybe a little bit more challenged or a little bit more apprehensive. So, we can definitely leverage the pockets of great things we have happening to make it more consistent across the way, and trying to strike that delicate balance of not trying to feel like we're digging our heels in and trying to pump the brakes on all of this, but making sure that if we're going to do something, we do it right. And changing culture is difficult, right? And making sure that it's seen as a positive and seen as, you know what, I can do this, not it's being done to me, but really looking at how are my colleagues doing this and how can I institute this in my daily practice. So, really being intentional about it isn't trying to delay it. It's just trying to make sure if we're going to do something, we do it right and we do it in the best interest of the kids, and making sure that the kids have a great experience and that they learn and they can know and can do what they need to by the time that course is over.
I had two other quick notes on mine as part of the presentation. One was about, which you didn't say a lot about, in terms of timed tests and kind of what you were thinking about in terms of what our practices should be, or how you were thinking to kind of discuss and consider what kind of administrative regs or where you all stand on time, because I didn't see anything about that kind of mention. So I'll give you a student is in a class and they have, 45 minutes to complete a test. Last 3 questions, they just don't finish because they're a slower test taker. Are they all, or we'll say last 4 questions or something. Are they all wrong? Right? Like, I think those are some of the, I don't expect an answer now. I think those are some of the questions that we kind of need to ask, right? Because if you're putting on your equity lens and thinking about what students need, some students need a little more time. Does not mean that students can take 3 days to take a test. We know this, right? But, and this is again, where you talk about teacher agency, I want to give that, right? But I do think that does sometimes happen, right? Where the teacher's like, okay, well, sorry, those last 2, you didn't finish them. I have to mark them wrong, but you had today to finish it. I think that's another discussion point is the timing of tests for students.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure if that was something that you guys talked about. You just kind of
and in all honesty, it hasn't been, and that's why I was can count on you to like push us to think about some things differently. But it does tie into the notion of the equity and really knowing our kids and looking at patterns and if they have everything correct up to that point, right? And they don't get to those last 3. Let's talk about that. But it's definitely something that we can definitely include in our conversations. And I do think it's a really important conversation as we really get to see, who kids are and the ways in which they kind of navigate assessment, experiences. So we'll definitely add that in. So thank you.
And I'll jump on just because Dr. G, you asked how what our thoughts were. So just, this is an immature thought, but do I believe there's some room for time tests? I do. When students sit for the SAT, they have a defined amount of time. I just sat last year for my superintendency praxis exam. You have a defined amount of time. Should that be all that students see? No, we need to be including more of the authentic assessment, and we do need to talk through that some more. So that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm going to push back and say to you that, again, you look at the research, and the research just does not support that. It does not really, it just doesn't. That's why many colleges are not no longer requiring the SATs or ACTs. Even my daughter's applying to law school this year. Some colleges aren't even requiring the LSAT. And colleges like Georgetown, not like random colleges off to the side, colleges that are known for, I think more and more what we're seeing is speed does not mean that I am smarter or that I deserve a higher grade. That speed does not mean that that's not the way in which I can demonstrate learning. We have some really gifted students who may just need time to demonstrate their learning. If the purpose of assessment is for students to be able to demonstrate their learning, then I do think we have to have some flexibility in our timing of tests. And I do think it's at least something that the committee should be talking about. I don't really know what the exact answer is, but I definitely think it's something the committee should be talking about. Doesn't mean we're doing away with SATs. No, we can't do away with SATs. We have to give standardized tests. It just is part of the educational system, right? That we have to play in. But I do think it's important for us to also lean on some of the research and what it's showing and what we are doing that's best for students as it relates to equity. I had one other note aside from time tests, and that was about support. Asking the committee to really start to think about, both at the middle schools and the high school, where does the support lie? Like, we're talking about assessment, but where does the support lie for that student that doesn't grasp the content outside of the classroom? How can we look at structuring things? A neighboring district is doing something called a lunch and learn next year, where they're starting to have some flexibility in that lunchtime. Mr. McBean is smiling because he's probably heard of it. They're starting to have some flexibility to allow students to get to those teachers to be able to make sure they can get the support that they need. I would just wonder, I think, again, not an answer, but asking the committee to start to think about, where does the support lie for students who do need to get additional support before taking a test or an assessment, or get additional support and help on a project or something like that. The high school schedule is so tight. And I know we have a couple things built in, but where can we even do better in that aspect? Dr. Waters and then Dr. Hart.
She's probably going to say what I'm going to say, but I just wanted to let you know that we actually today, this afternoon, several of us were in a meeting. Mr. Nicholson had to step out to do, I think, some interviewing, so he missed this part. But we actually had a conversation with a couple of the high school administrators, and we talked about lunch and learn today, because a couple of us are also in a neighboring district that does that. And kind of had success with it in our experience with our own children. So that is actually being discussed. We talked about some different things we can maybe look to do with the schedule. I honestly haven't had a chance to, talk to the boss yet about any of this. So I don't want to say too much, but we were having that conversation. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I also wanted to mention a lot of what I'm hearing today. And again, we always appreciate your feedback, all of you. And I'm thinking about the time that we have allocated for the high school team in particular, in the opening days of school. They actually have time in their departments to talk about assessment, talk about the new homework admin regs. So a lot of these conversations that are coming up and the things you're asking, can we get this a little sooner? I think we could absolutely add some of this to the agenda. The piece in particular about time tests. That's an area that we haven't really talked about, that piece, but it's something I think would fit very nicely into the plan for one of the in-service days. So again, I just always appreciate these conversations. And I think there's ways in which we can incorporate it into some of our planning for the opening days.
As always, a great conversation, and why we have wonderful divergent thoughts on these calls so that we're able to kind of, it's good to be, we, as you know, we are a committee that likes the discussion. We like to be able to have that with you all so that, you know, maybe it helps. As a district, we're all on the same team. We're all North Penn's team. I mean, 3 of us are on other teams too, but we're on North Penn's team for this committee. And, you know, we all just want to get to the same place. We all just want to be better. And so thank you all for the robust discussion. Are there any other questions or comments as it relates to the assessment piece? I would ask for an update on assessment. Looking at the timeline, maybe that would be in February, mid-year, could be an update on assessment. And then, you know, offline, maybe you all could give us an update on some of the questions that we had about some things happening a little bit earlier. If some of that could be phased in, I think that would be great.
Got it.
Okay, I think that was all on our agenda. Is there anything else, Dr. Bowers, or anything else that you want to close out with? Or
Yeah, nope, that's everything. I think we have, I guess we move to public comment unless there's anything additional.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nicholson and Dr. Hart, for you know, entertaining us and for providing us the opportunity to be able to have the discussion. I don't mean entertaining as in you were like entertaining, like so, but you know, entertaining our questions, I should say, and allowing us to be able to put our, you know, voices and ideas into the mix.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have anyone for public comment?
We do. So I know we've read our statement, so if we're ready to jump into it, our first public comment will be from Jason Lanier. Jason, I have enabled your microphones and you're ready to begin. Please state your name and municipality and you can begin your comments, please.
Jason Lanier, Lansdale. First want to say I like the idea of some of this authentic assessment, if that's what it's called. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to be butchering up what the new acronym is going to be. Like applied understanding makes sense to me. Not all kids are can apply book knowledge immediately, but understand concepts in a bigger picture sounds perfectly reasonable. Not a problem with that. I guess my concern comes is whether or not authentic assessment is going to start to then override traditional assessment, because there's still a lot of value in traditional assessment. A kid that can understand something very well and is prepared sometimes does well on tests because they're prepared. Kids that aren't prepared sometimes think they know what they want to do and or think they understand a concept, but they really don't when it comes to application. So gaming that tool, I think you're going to find a lot of that in high school, and it's just, or any school, because it's the, you know, traditional sort of bell curve. You have really strong students, you have really weak students, and most are in the middle, and some are going to be better at gaming that assessment pool. Dr. G said something about there is a lot of research showing this equity application is positive. I'd really like to see that. If you could send me that, I would love to take a look at it, because I can't seem to find anything on that. And I'm looking for this because I want to know how this is supposed to work. I said back in May of 21 or something, I mentioned that this equity seems to be critical race theory. And a lot of you guys poo-pooed me and said, no, that's not what it is. It's not an application. The professional development guys you've brought in, primarily Tyrone Howard, has written articles regarding implementation of critical race theory in education. And it sounds a lot like what you're talking about right now. You can read them all. He writes in it's called the Handbook of Critical Race Theory in Education. So he's written a number of articles for them, and he's written a number of papers on this. And it sounds like this is what's being applied. Now, if it turns out all of this is really good, I'm on board, but where I'm concerned this is going, just as I was concerned with this last year, is this means lowering of standards and kids ending up not being as proficient because there's lower hurdles for them to meet. And you end up with kids less prepared to go to college. And if you guys know college professors, because I know a bunch of them, that's what they're telling me, is they say kids come in and they're not prepared to go into class. And there's a lot of remedial stuff that has to happen every single year. And whether or not some of the Ivies and the notable schools are dropping some of their requirements, I'm not sure if that makes a lot of sense. It certainly
Thank
is.
you, Ms. Maloney.
There's nobody else. You can give me a little longer. That certainly seems to make sense for them, maybe, but it also seems to be a little bit of a political motivation.
Thank
So
you, Mr.
I would
Lanier.
really
We're
like to
gonna
see
stop
where
there.
you're talking.
This is the last ECI meeting before the beginning of school. Just an opportunity to wish our teachers well. And, we are grateful as a committee to be able to support you. I think the conversation about assessment, of course, even when we were pushing back, we as educators, and Tim is always great at like reminding us of this, is like, we want to support teachers. And speaking to the point of our last public comment, I have great faith because I've had 3 children go through this district, in the teachers in our district and the agency that we need to give them. They are not lowering the standards for our students. These are professionals who deserve every bit of respect. They are, they have master's degrees. Some of them have doctorates. They know their content and they know how to teach. And so I absolutely believe North Penn standards are right where they, should be as it relates to our teachers. And I want to wish all of our teachers a good start to the school year. The only thing I will say about in terms of equity is I continue to define equity for everyone. Equity is giving every student in this district what they need, not just culturally, but every student what they need. So there are students in our district who need an IEP, who need an individualized education plan. And we are going to give them that along with every goal in their plan and make sure that we're meeting their needs. That is what equity is. It's meeting every student in our district, treating them as a student and giving them what they need. And then with that, Dr. Bauer, I believe you have something to say, and then we will adjourn.
Yes, Dr. G, thank you. And as I always try to do, and I do believe the committee format is more appropriate for us to have the discourse and the conversation, not necessarily a back and forth with the audience of citizens, but to comment. And Mr. Lanier, I will give it to you. You are committed, and you do deserve a response in committee meetings if time allows. I do think there's a difference between talking about systems that are in place that don't necessarily give an equal playing field and teaching something to students. So for example, just because you're taking a look at your discipline data or your attendance data or your course placement data and trying to determine why there might be inequities there, that doesn't mean that that is a concept that you are teaching to students, right? You are looking at your systems that exist to try to make sure you're meeting the needs of everyone. There's just we've had several meetings with Dr. Howard. He has presented, I think, to the faculty twice, and he asks good questions. He asks us to look at our data. He asks us to take a look at where our students are placed, what their test scores are, and how we are meeting all of our students' needs. That's different than the curriculum and what you are teaching in a math classroom or a social studies classroom. I just think there's a very clear delineation between taking a look at theory and data and providing support for kids and curriculum. And I think that delineation has been lost on some. So again, happy to talk about it. I always am. I pride myself on being fairly accessible to folks. So Mr. Lanier, let me know. Maybe we can chat tomorrow evening before or after the meeting. Thank you, Dr. G.
Thank you, Dr. Bauer. Okay, so with that, I believe we need a motion. Oh, we have summary of items. I believe we only have student travel. Again, good luck to the cheerleaders. And we will move forward with a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
second. And all in favor? Aye. And meeting is adjourned. Everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Good night,
Bye, everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.